This is Lorenzo, and this is the training routines taxonomy video series, lesson number 8, routine number 4. It's on the cycle complex. It is a metabolic conditioning routine focused on helping you master 2 of the 5 skills, speed and endurance, and help you master 2 of the 30 fitness benchmarks that we discussed previously. And the way we're going to do that is using our MSP exercise protocol. Only 5 exercises, see you inside. All right, so this is the 4th of 5 lower body routines. We're making progress. And of course, just 1 out of a total of 16 routines. We still have quite a few to go. To the left of our matrix, we can see the routine type. And again, when I say type, I'm referring to, is it a complex or a track? You can see it's a complex, not because it's complicated, but because it's not a track. The cycle complex is about helping you develop maximum speed and endurance in the sagittal hip dimension. MEC just stands for metabolic conditioning. It's just a fancy term. Metcon, you'll hear it all the time, but it just means you're conditioning certain metabolic systems or energy systems. The focus is more on energy systems rather than a specific strength skill like with gymnastics and weightlifting. What's really unique about cycling, however, is that compared to running and rowing, it's very low weight bearing and the tension in the legs is constant. So we can really just focusing on conditioning those energy systems, focusing specifically on the quads, but also glutes are heavily involved. All right, moving on. Now, before we just jump straight into our exercise protocol, which so many people do blindly, it's important that we understand why we do what we do. In order to do that, we need a training plan. And with all good plans, it needs an objective, a strategy, and then we need tactics to implement the strategy. Now, before we look at the objectives, it's important to understand that we could actually judge an exercises protocol by how effectively it's able to help us achieve our objectives. And so we can't actually value the credibility or the utility of our exercise protocols if it doesn't have clear objectives. So in our case, our objectives are the following. The first one is a benchmark of endurance. It's called the FTP20. Now, for the cyclists out there, they'll be well aware of what FTP means, but it stands for your functional threshold power. And your functional threshold power is one of the most predictive performance measures out there. And essentially, all this is a measurement of how much power you can produce and for how long you can sustain that indefinitely. And so the 20 here means that you're going to do an FTP20 test as part of your performance measure. The 3 here means it's going to be measured in watts per kilogram. Watts is just a measure of power, and then it's going to be normalized to your weight. So for example, if you're a male and you weigh 70 kilograms, you're going to times that by 3, which gives us 210 watts. So that's kind of the goal. You want to, as a male recreational athlete, you want to target 210 watts for total 20 minutes. For the females, you're targeting 2.5 times your body weight, which, let's say, for example, you were 60 kilos, then that's going to be 150 watts. So again, what does this mean? It means that you get on the bike and you're going to get a power score, and you may see that it's 100 and you'll be like, oh shit, I need to get to 150 and then hold it there for 20 minutes as your goal. Well, exactly. For our second benchmark, we have our MMP3. Sounds like MP3, but anyway, MMP3 just stands for maximum minute power, and it's a 3-minute assessment whereby you get on the bike and for 3 minutes you go all out. You don't hold back, and it's going to calculate your maximum 1-minute power across 3 minutes. So it's an average. And as you can see, it's not that much higher in terms of a benchmark. For the guys, you're trying to get a power of 3.5 watts per kilogram. So again, just times 3.5 by your weight. For the ladies, it's 3. Not that much higher than your FTP, but really your MMP3 is really a benchmark of, I call it speed because you want to go as fast as possible. And for your FTP, it's really one of endurance. Now, whether you want to focus more on your speed or your endurance or both doesn't really matter, because in terms of our strategy, the requirements are the same. Because remember, our strategy is about looking at the requirements for the objective. And specifically for us, it's looking at the mobility, stability, and strength requirements to, well, cycle efficiently and effectively. And we actually see that for cycling, you don't need that much mobility or even stability, unlike all the other movements. However, I still recommend that you spend some time on mobility and dynamic mobility work before you just jump on the bike, particularly because cyclists are known for actually having terrible mobility and poor posture. So we're going to make sure that you as a cyclist will not suffer from that. So for mobility, we're going to recommend that you actually open up the hips and the thorax, simply because when cycling, you're sitting for long periods of time. Well, actually, in this case, maximum 20 minutes, but still, we want to ensure that we want to open up the hips, open up the thorax, open up the shoulders, because we spend so much time hunched over. So that will be our mobility strategy. In terms of our core, not a lot of stability required. The bike's doing that for us. So we're not spending a lot of time thinking about that. Really, our main concern is our third strategy here, and that is our ability to produce maximum hip, knee extension, flexion forces. And that's really going to come down onto two things. Number one, your position on the bike will determine your performance almost just as much as your actual fitness. But once you have the best biomechanical position for yourself, then it's just about spending as much time on the bike, both in two different domains, in the speed domain and the endurance domain. All right, so moving on, for our tactics or our training space and equipment, we're going to need an open training zone. That's going to be for our mobility and our stability work, and of course a cardio zone. Your cardio zone will be either in your home or at the gym. In terms of the actual equipment, you're going to need a jump rope and we recommend a watt bike, but it can be any bike. As long as your bike can measure distance, power, time, you're good to go. And just start with what you have. You don't have to have the perfect bike to get started. Okay, so with our objective and our strategy in mind and our tactics in place, we are finally ready to explore and implement our exercise protocol. But before we do, I just want to say something very important, that I love my exercise protocol, but I'm also at the same time agnostic as to the exact exercises and what sequence we do. Because as long as we make improvement in these benchmarks, or any benchmarks that most closely correlates with improvements in true performance, I'm going to be happy. Because as I said earlier, the utility or effectiveness of any exercise protocol is directly dependent on how safely, effectively, and efficiently it can carry out its objectives. Okay, so for our first two exercises, we have the hip spin up and the butcher's block. Remember, in the mobility category, it serves as our warm-up, but also it's an opportunity for us to actually work on certain mobility deficits that we may have. And so we want to do this in a way that both warms up the body, but also will lead to long-term mobility adaptations. Next, in the stability category, technically not stability exercises, but they serve the same function for helping us prime the body for the main event. They are the total body dynamic joint mobilization routine, as we saw in the run complex. I was going to say track. And then we have the jump rope, followed by one of two events. So you're going to do exercise 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you'll either do the 20-minute FTP endurance protocol, or you're going to focus on maximum power or your speed protocol, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off for 4 rounds. Okay, so what I want to do now is quickly show you what each of these exercises look like, image by image, so you guys can get a sense for the flow of the protocol itself. Because remember, the main function and purpose of these videos is to give you more of a framework and a structure of how to think about your training, rather than give you the precise instructions or protocols for each of the exercises. However, if you do want a quick and easy reference to video tutorials of each of these exercises, make sure to download the training routines taxonomy, because in there will be links to video tutorials by some of the world's best teachers and thinkers on each of these exercises. Okay, so for our first exercise, we have the hip spin up. Again, the reason it keeps showing up is because we're still in the sagittal hip dimension. But for those who don't know, the hip spin up is our ultimate go-to hip flexion, hip extension, hip external rotation mobility drill. Okay, so once we're done with our hip spin up, we move on to the second exercise, which is the butcher's block. Don't ask me why it's called the butcher's block, but I love the stretch. It is a classic shoulder flexion and thoracic extension opener. We recommend that you spend 2 to 3 minutes, but again, mobility is not really a precise protocol. We have to go really by feeling and depending on your current level of mobility. So you have to become sensitive to your own body's needs, hence why I'm not giving you very precise protocols. Once we're done with the butcher's block, we move on to what I call the dynamic body as our third exercise. As you guys can see it here, I'm literally just mobilizing each joint of the body, starting with the neck and moving my way all the way down. Once we're done with our dynamic body, by the way, this shouldn't take more than 3 minutes. We move on to the jump rope. Now, for the jump rope, you want to spend a minimum of 3 minutes just jumping up and down. or 200 total jumps. Okay, once we're done with our jumping protocol, our body should be sufficiently warmed up, heart rate is elevated, we're finally ready for the main event, the fifth and final exercise, which is going to be one of two cycling events. We recommend, especially if you only plan on cycling once a week, that you focus on our 20-minute protocol focused on endurance. It's technically an FTP20 benchmark test disguised also as a workout. In fact, this follows a training philosophy that I have, which is called test training, that your training is your test and your test is your training. So for example, the protocol is simple. You'll get on the bike, you're going to set a timer and go all out for 20 minutes. Relatively all out. No one can go out for 20 minutes. But this is going to force you to focus on pushing yourself as much as you can, but also holding back because you know you have to go for 20 minutes, right? So you're going to track two things, distance and power, measured in watts and kilometers. So let's say, for example, you do your very first event, you're going to set a baseline score. Let's say it is you get 9 kilometers or 2.2 watts per kilo. Your goal, obviously, is to try to continuously improve upon these numbers for every subsequent cycling event. Alternatively, or if you plan on cycling twice per week, you shift your focus to our sprint interval training protocol focused on speed or power, maximum power development. It's our 3x3 protocol. It's very similar to the Norwegian 4x4, but we have found that 3x3 is more doable for most people and just more sustainable. Very difficult, but the protocol is simple. For 3 minutes, you'll go all out. You're not going to hold back, well, to the extent that you can. And so this is 3 minutes on and followed by 3 minutes of rest. And you'll repeat this 4 times. So in summary, the cycle complex is a hip spin up, followed by the butcher's block, a dynamic mobility drill, jump rope, and finally a cycling event focused on either speed or endurance.